Hey guys, Tyler here from Small Craft Fishermen, Small Craft Outfitters. Putting together another quick and dirty, nothing too fancy maintenance video by popular demand. I've gotten this request from subscribers on YouTube, from owners on the Feelfree owner page, customers. Actually, the boat I'm using here today is a Feelfree Lure 2 Tandem that is customer owned. I get this question a lot in all these forums on what do you need to do to maintain the Feelfree Overdrive. It is a pretty solid system. There's a few frequently asked questions I get and some things that we do by default and then on a regular basis for our personal and our customer overdrive system. So I will walk you guys through that. So we'll need a few tools here to do this maintenance. Number one being an Allen set. I keep one of these in my kayak at all times because it'll cover pretty much every Allen bolt in the boat. I actually, on my kayak, I have a bicycle multi-tool because it has all of these metric Allens plus Phillips head and some other things that come in handy sometimes if you have something come loose on the water or have to fix something. What we need specifically for this job is a 3mm, 4mm, and a 6mm Allen wrench. So if you have individual wrenches, that'll work just fine. Next is we have our white lithium grease. Number one question I get on this maintenance of this overdrive is what do I put in to grease it, to maintain it? White lithium grease. It's a low temp grease. I'll get into why here in a little bit as we go through this. The stuff from the factory you'll notice kind of oozes out. I don't know if you can really see it on the video here, but it kind of oozes out the sides and stuff. It's seems to be a thinner grease. The main thing with the white lithium is it uses a solid grease. It cannot be the aerosol. The aerosol will work, but it'll run out because it's too thin. The accelerant in the aerosol can makes it thinner, and it'll just leak out. I've tried that from experience. I also have a grease gun here with a grease end in here that fits perfectly into the grease slots on the overdrive, which I'll get into. If you don't want to go that route, I think this cost me about 20 bucks at a farm store. They're pretty cheap, and then these white lithium tubes are like $3 to $4 a piece. Pretty cheap. I'm a dealer, so I put this in every kayak we sell with overdrive before it goes out the door, just to give it that extra protection, lubrication before the customer has any issues. Helps with the break-in, makes it smoother, quieter, etc. There's also, if you don't want to invest in a grease gun like this, Lucas Oil, you can get them at most Autoport store, makes a kind of it looks like a toothpaste tube of grease that you can just manually squeeze into the grease points. You just cut the tip off small enough that you can just put it in there and squeeze it in. I know a lot of folks that do that. So I will get into what exactly I do for regular maintenance, what I do for greasing, things like that. Again, a big question that I get asked in various forums on overdrive maintenance that'll keep it running smoothly and quietly. So first thing I'm going to do here is we have the prop. This is basic maintenance that I do every couple times out, especially if I'm in weedy conditions. I mean, if I get into weeds, I typically backpedal with the overdrive to kick the weeds out, but it never fails that you get into some stringier weeds, the angel hair stuff. You get into some snagged line that some people left behind. You get some monofilament or some braid wrapped around your prop, and it just makes pedaling more difficult and less efficient. So this is very important because the number one issue that I've seen that people have with the overdrive is they will say, I'm pedaling forward, but it's slipping. My gears are stripped, or the pedals aren't engaging, or something of the nature, and they'll say, I can pedal backwards though. Well, what happens is I will take the 3mm Allen wrench, and there's two grub nuts, one on each side of the prop here, one on this side, and one on the other side. So So you want to loosen those grub nuts enough that you can slide the prop off of the prop shaft. And again, this is a customer boat. He asked me to do some maintenance. He's got, looks like mostly dried weeds, probably harmless, but good to clean them out on the prop shaft here. So what you have here is the prop shaft. That's what the prop connects to. The grub bolts connect to this little groove here, and then you have your shear pin. The shear pin, you can get it from Feelfree, you can get it from your dealer. Sometimes there's issues of stock. I actually did the metric to US conversion because it's a metric pin, but the US conversion is 5/64 inch by 1 inch. You can actually get those from Fastenal. I get them by packs of 100, just so that me and my customers are covered. After I've done what I've shown you here, I've only blown one shear pin. There's some key things in putting this back on, but you can get them from Fastenal for like 10 to 12 cents a pop. Super inexpensive. They are actually spring pins or roll pins, depending on who you go through. They are just rolled up pieces of metal, essentially. That's a pin. So what will happen is if you're pedaling along and you hit something hard, or you pedal too hard and your prop wasn't on properly, what have you. I've done it when I hit hard rocks and I just try to torque through it because I'm pretty hard on my stuff to test it out for customers. This pin will actually bend into an S shape. So if somebody says I'm pedaling really hard and it's just slipping, the gears aren't engaging, I feel like I stripped my gears, but I can pedal backwards, it's because this pin got bent in an S shape. And what'll happen is there's these grooves on the prop that pin sets into right here. And when it's in the S shape and you try to pedal forward, because that's usually when it happens, because you're mostly going forward, and you pedal hard, it'll actually slip outside of these grooves and the prop will slip. So it'll almost feel like the gears are grinding or stripped or something. But then when you pedal backwards, the edges of these pins will actually, as you pedal backwards, grab those grooves. So reverse will kind of work, actually. It's a really weird feeling. If you've had it happen, you know what I'm talking about. So I've also seen it on customers' kayaks where they don't realize they have a problem, and I go to clean off this prop and the pin's bent. They just have so much braided line is the worst, in here, that it helped grab that prop and propelled them forward. It's just, they said it was really hard to pedal. It just seemed harder than it used to be. So a couple things to check out. This one looks good, just cleaned it off. The shear pin's good. Like I said, if you need a replacement, get a hold of your dealer, or you can go to Fastenal, order online, 10 to 12 cents a piece. If you have a local Fastenal, you pick it up at the store for free, or I think it's cheaper to ship to store. Otherwise, you can have them shipped to your house. Costs a little more, but I always have an extra shear pin or two on my kayak when I'm running one of my kayaks with overdrive. So what I'm going to do is put the prop back on here. Alright, so I paused the video while I did the put the prop on, just so I could make sure it was seated properly for this customer. But the number one issue, the number one reason that I've personally experienced, and customers and I've seen on the Facebook groups, etc., with that problem I told you with the prop slipping or the drive slipping, the four-gear slipping, whatever you want to call it, is these grub nuts on either side of the prop aren't tightened properly. You have to really torque them down to the point where you really can't torque them anymore. Sorry, I'm trying to aim through the camera. I've got this really tight. I figured this out in frigid waters here in Wisconsin in March once, in less than ideal conditions. I was running my overdrive all day, and then I ran into some rock dams with it, and then I was torquing it, pedaling really hard. I'm a cyclist, so I have fairly strong leg muscles. On the way back to the shore, and it started doing this, and I freaked out. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I just blow out my $900 pedal system? What's going on? Paddled back, not a big deal, but found that S-pin was bent. What it is these grub nuts aren't tight enough to hold tight on this shaft. They will prematurely slip and bend that shear pin. So since I figured this out and really torque these grub nuts down anytime I take the prop off and replace it, I've only blown one shear pin since, and it was because I got caught in a mess of rocks and sticks and decided I was able to just plow through it and really torqued on it, and then it bent, which is by design. You want that shear pin to bend before you blow out your drive system. So if you do that, main thing, can't stress it enough, tighten those grub nuts down tight. 3mm wrench for that, actually. Keep it on your boat at all times. You never know when you might need to swap out that shear pin. Keep an extra shear pin. Like I said, get one from your dealer, from Feelfree, or if you want, they're 5/64 inch by 1 inch from Fastenal for 10 to 12 cents a piece, plus whatever shipping or delivery fees, that depending on your area. So next we will move on to the crank arms and a couple other components before we get into the greasing. So another complaint that I receive, a problem that I hear of in the various forums, is the crank arms falling off, or the bolts for them falling off. These crank arms are tapered onto the cranks themselves. So typically, if these bolts back out after a lot of use, the crank arm bolts right here, the bolt will fall out. I've had this happen personally. The bolt will fall out, but the crank arm will stay on and still work, which is a good thing. It might be a little wobbly, but it's not the end of the world. That is easily remedied. I've already done it on this customer's kayak, so I'm not going to do it again. But this is a 6mm Allen bolt here, and I put red Loctite on the threads. You could use blue Loctite. Both work the same. Keep in mind that the blue Loctite is removable with extra force. The red Loctite is not removable unless you apply heat. I personally never remove the crank arms, because if you've tried, it's a pain because they're tapered. You need to pry them off. Most of my customers do not remove the crank arms. They just leave them on and either leave the overdrive in the kayak during transport, or just take the whole unit out itself and throw it in the back seat, in the bed of the truck, in the trunk, whatever. I personally just leave mine in the kayaks at all times. Haven't had any issues. So for that, I use red Loctite. Don't need to worry about taking it off. If I had something break on the crank arm, I could just apply heat with a torch and back that out. The other thing is the pedals. I had a few pedals that have stripped out, the threads inside the pedals here. I had that happen personally. What I tend to do is blue Loctite the pedal threads. If you do actually have the threads completely strip out and fall out, you'll find that you can't put them back in. What you can do to get you by is use some JB weld and JB weld them back in just to get you by. Then get a hold of your dealer that you bought it from, and they'll work with Feelfree to get a replacement. If it's under warranty, they'd probably be taken care of there, but your dealer will be able to help you out with that more. I've had a few warranty claims on those pedals, but considering the amount of overdrives that I've sold, it's pretty rare. So not a big deal there. The other piece that I want to show you before we get into the actual greasing of the overdrive is these pins. These are the pins that are used to release and raise the drive or hold it down when it's in the down position. I've had these back out, specifically the left one, where they work loose over time. Same thing as the crank arms. Apply some blue or red Loctite, screw them in. Frankly, there's not a reason to remove them. And if you did have a problem with them and you use red Loctite, you can hit it with a torch and just back it out. So on this customer, his were getting a little loose, so I just red Loctited them, so it'll no longer be an issue. So now the number one question I get on the pedal system, the overdrive system, is greasing. So we will go into that next. Alright, so number one question I get on the overdrive is, how do I grease it? What do I use to grease it, and how often do I grease it? I'm going to show you the what to use and the how to do it. The how often really depends on you. I'm a guide. I'm out all the time. This year I'm mostly using the Moken 12.5 version 2, so I'm not using pedals as much. But I would usually grease it every month or so. Here in Wisconsin, our season runs through, it depends, May through September. Typically I'd run it January through November, depending on how much ice is on the water and the temperatures. But every month or so. For tournament fishermen that are out all the time, every weekend doing tournaments, might be the same case every month. For the average recreational user, casual user, maybe once or twice a season if you're like us and only have a few months of a season. Really, what it comes down to is how it feels. If it feels like it's getting a little harder to pedal, if it feels like it's getting a little noisier than usual, I'd add some grease to it. And I'll show you how to do that here in a second. The Overdrive, when you first get it, my Overdrive is several years old. It was one of the first ones that came out when Feelfree started releasing them, and I love it. It's butter smooth. It's been broken in for years, a lot of miles on it. I get a new one and then realize how much I work to break that in. And this, by greasing it with white lithium grease, it actually helps with that break-in process. Helps make it easier, smoother, quieter right from the get-go. There still is a break-in process. I've actually torn one of these down. All the gears in here, all the way down to the lower unit, are all metal gears. They're spiral worm gears. Great thing is they are solid, super solid. I mean, it would take quite a bit to break them. I don't have the broken down gears here with me. They're in our storage unit right now. The downside is it's going to be a little noisier, a little stiffer when you first get it until those metal gears break in. But this greasing process definitely helps, and then it helps in the long run going forward using it. So I'll show you that here next. Alright, so what we're going to need for this process is a 4mm Allen wrench. So I have my Allen multi-tool here, and there are 3 grease points on the Overdrive pedal system. And you can easily identify them. It's in the owner's manual, last page, I believe. But they're these Allen heads with these little rubber grommets here. Depending on how old your pedals is, this one's kind of falling off. But this one on the right side is towards the front, past the pedals, and that kind of groove past the pedals here. There's one there. There's one on the right side on the lower unit on the very bottom here. And then I'll flip this over. There's one more just behind the left crank arm, the left pedal. Those are the 3. Now, I have the storage bottle / motor insert / urinal, whatever you might want to call it, partially removed to show you one of the fallacies. Some people say, oh, there's a gear in here, you need to grease it. You can see quite a bit of the factory grease on it. That is only for the motor unit. So if you have the motor unit, the teeth on the back of the motor connect to that, and then there's a switch up here actually that disengages the pedals and engages the motor. So there is no need to waste any grease on that unless you have the motor unit. So if you want to put some white lithium on it, if you have a motor, most people, this grease suffices. It holds up plenty long, but don't waste your grease on it if you don't have the motor. If the motor is extra noisy after it breaks in, you can add some white lithium to that. Okay, so there's really no science to this. I have this pedal drive system, this overdrive system removed from the kayak, obviously. I do have the kayak up on stands. I find it easier to, well, it's harder to apply the grease when it's out of the boat. I mean, I've put it on my workbench before, and then secured the plate up in the upward position. But what I like to do is actually crank the pedals as I apply the grease, just to work the grease into the gears and make sure I have all the reservoirs for grease pretty full. So what I'm going to do, actually, just for purpose of this video, is I'm going to pause the video and remove all 3 of these grease points that I showed you guys, drop the pedal drive into the kayak, and hook up my grease gun and show you guys how I actually grease it. Okay, so I have removed the grease points, the Allen screws to the grease points. Again, one in front of the right pedal, one down here on the right side of the lower unit, and then one here just in front of the left pedal. Hopefully you can see that. And I dropped it back into the kayak. I haven't fully latched it down. This latch is loose. I just put in one of these pins. It's not like I'm torquing on it. I'm just going to be moving the pedals slowly to work the grease into the various chambers. Alright, so what I have here is a grease gun like I mentioned, and what I do is I hook the grease connection up to the thread. I can't remember these grease connections specifically. You can get the needle tip for the front of these grease guns that go right into that hole. Otherwise, if you don't want to invest in a grease gun, you can get, like I said, at car part stores, they have the Lucas oil tubes that look like toothpaste tubes. They have white lithium grease. You just cut the tip off, squeeze it in like a super glue tube or what have you. But what I do is I go ahead and pump this in. Alright, so you just pump it up. Kind of keep going until, see here, the grease is starting to pump back out on you. You might want to clean up rag around because this gets a little messy. But what I'll do is I'll give a few cranks to the pedal, forward and backward, and then I'll give it a few more pumps. If you have that tube of Lucas, just give it a few more squeezes. It's coming back out again, so we're good here. So now I'll move on to the next one. Alright, now I'm doing the other side here. Giving it a few pumps. As far as volume, I've actually had some overdrives that were used that have taken an entire one of these, or almost an entire tube. Really depends on the situation. This in. Alright, and that's coming back out, so this one's good. Wipe off the mess here with my rag, and we'll move on to the bottom. Alright, and before I actually move on to the bottom one, I'm going to put the grease point bolts back in on the top. Since these are full, you want to leave them that way. If you move to the bottom as you're cranking the pedals, you might kick more grease out. This just makes it a little less messy. So again, the 4mm Allen, put them back in the top two. You don't have to torque them down because you don't want to break the rubber gasket. I mean, on mine the rubber gasket's gone because it's been used so well, but just avoid it if you can. Just get it pretty essentially finger tight. Now we'll move on to the bottom. Alright, so here's the bottom one, right on the lower unit. I've given it a few pumps before we started here. Giving it a few more. Give the pedals a crank. It's noticeably smoother. You probably can't tell on the video. Most people that I tell to do this, they'll notice that it's quieter and smoother right from the get-go. Like I said, it'll help with the braking process. The grease from the factory isn't the greatest as far as holding up. It's pretty thin. It'll actually leak out, as you've probably noticed if you have one. And there, it's starting to ooze back out on me, so we're pretty good. So what I'm going to do is wipe up the mess here and put in that last plug. Alright, so I have this reassembled. I used a rag to kind of clean up the mess around the grease points. It's hard to get across in video, so I didn't mess with it. But it is quite a bit smoother, quite a bit quieter since re-greasing it. It is mid-July here in Wisconsin. Knowing this customer and how much he uses it, he'll probably be good for the rest of the season. He might want to re-grease here at the end of this year or beginning of next year. But we've got, 2-3 solid months of kayaking. If it were me, I'd probably, like I said before, do this every month. But that's really what it comes down to. It only takes a few minutes. It's not very expensive to maintain the overdrive system. Makes it a whole different overdrive when you have the prop on tight and the grease applied to all the 3 grease points. If you guys have any questions, comment below. If there's any other maintenance videos, quick and dirty maintenance videos you'd like to see, comment below. Make sure you give us a subscribe. Once we hit 1,000 subscribers, we're going to be doing some giveaway of some kind. We haven't decided what that is yet. But it should be something pretty cool because we do custom rods. We sell Feelfree kayaks, so we always have something cool laying around that we can give away to us folks. Thanks again for watching, and make sure to subscribe. Thank you.